Yes, my name is Brendan Vanous. I've been in the games industry about 18 years now, a little over, and for half that time, a little over again, I've been mainly focused on networking and online experiences, particularly with back-end services. Spent 7 years in ATG as a lead developer, working with titles that were using the Xbox Live service and using their own XLSP-based services, if you're familiar with that technology. These days, I'm with PlayFab, which is a game backend as a service company. So it's a company that offers a range of services which are very much custom designed for what game developers need. So instead of it being like a data aggregation point, it's a place where data is aggregated, but also there's an analytics package which is focused on your ARPU, your RPPU, a variety of other factors. We do matchmaking, back-end custom game service logic, all that sort of thing. But it's neither here nor there. What I'm here to talk to you about and what I'm here to tell you is how to crush your game. I will point out that everything that I'm about to talk about, with one exception, and I'll let you guys guess which one that is at the end, is something I've actually seen a title do in the time that I've been doing this, whether at ATG or at PlayFab. Mostly the former, since that's the longer period of time. Now, with that said, how many people here are online service developers? Anyone? No? Perfect. We have no spies in attendance who will spoil the mission. Okay. So this talk is going to help show you all the things you can do that will just destroy your title. Now, I'm going to be focusing on online games exclusively, obviously. I'm also going to be focusing on the technical side of things. I'm not going to dive too deep on the tech, simply because it's only a 20-minute talk. Doesn't really give us time to cover all the range of possibilities. I had to cull a few out. It's like deciding which of your favorite kids doesn't get to play on the team, but had to be done. Okay. A lot of games, the reason I'm focusing on tech is a lot of games are going to do fine without any help from us on the technical side of things. As you guys are well aware, engagement, acquisition, retention, these are major problems for games, but they're much more focused on the design side of things, making sure that your players are having a fun experience. For today, we're going to talk about the things which are, they're the back end, they're the things that take place under the covers, they're the things that can be more easily overlooked. So using these tools, you too will be able to destroy games. So diving right on in. The simplest thing you could possibly do, just a complete lack of load testing on the game. Now this is way too obvious, nobody's going to fall for it. Okay, everybody knows they at least need to do some minimal amount of testing on their games. Plus, it's not really satisfying. If your mark is going to fall for this one, it's somebody who's got absolutely no experience whatsoever. So, but what most of the people you're going to be working with don't know is exactly how complicated the internet is. So back in '82, when you had maybe a double handful of sites online, that was the whole internet. That was it. Every single thing. These days, and that's not even these days, that's about 10 years ago, 2005, that was the map of the internet. And you'll notice the little blow-up section they chose is for one of the simplest segments of the internet possible. The number of connections possible, the different ways in which sites are connected, the actual number of configurations that are required to make things work correctly is astonishing. In some days, it's just a miracle to think that it works at all. But this will help you. So, okay. When it comes to load testing, and the reason I showed you that is because the simplest way to make a title fail is to just do simple load testing. Now, simple load testing is where you've got the concept of the amount of RPS that a game needs. So it's requests per second. So your average user on your title is doing what? Let's say 40 requests per second. For some titles, that's going to be high, and for some low. So what you might say to your engineering team is, oh, it's really simple. All we have to do is scale up the volume coming from the client. So you scale it up 1,000 times, make it 40,000 RPS coming from a fake client that you put together. Obviously, that drives a huge amount of scale to the game, really loads the server and sees that the CPU can take it, that the processes will work right, that things will scale up. It makes people think that something real is happening. The truth of the matter is a little bit more subtle than that, because this overlooks a number of factors. What happens when you hit a certain number of ports that are being used, or IP connections? What happens when you have different latency values? When users are trying to connect and exchange data from different geolocations? Well, you don't really know unless you test it. So Easy enough to make them fail that way. Now, knowledgeable testers, people who've really spent a lot of time doing this sort of thing, are going to really make your job tough here. So I'm glad to see we didn't have any of those guys here. So what these guys have seen is that, frankly, the internet hates everybody. You've seen it, you've experienced it, your packets drop, your whole internet service provider drops. The last mile is fantastic. It's probably the best thing that can help you at all, because the last mile getting to the end user is the worst point of connection. That's where most of the failures actually occur. So they've seen it, they're ready for it. So they're probably going to draw up a test plan which actually addresses some of the things I was just talking about. So they're going to say, well, why don't we use distributed clients? And why don't we use a cloud service so that we can have them coming in from a number of different geos? Okay, if you see these guys, run. Because they're the ones who are going to make your job hard. You're not going to be able to make the title fail this way if they've got a really good test plan that's really well thought out and is giving a realistic test to the title. All right, so let's try another tech. Scalability. Okay, so scalability is related to load, but there's other ways you can make the title fail using it. You're not going to get away with no scalability. Obviously, I threw this one in here just to make a point. Nobody's going to be fooled. They know that they're going to need more than one server over time as their user base scales up. If you're really clever, you can try it. You could say, oh, yeah, it'll scale, no problem. Unless they've actually tested it, they won't know. But most won't fall for that, like I said. So go with linear scaling. This one's great because it looks exactly like the thing you need. As a matter of fact, if you go and you look online at a lot of papers on scalability, they're going to draw a chart that looks very much like this, where linear scaling shows that as your requests come in, as your usage levels grow, you just add another server and that causes you to grow, and you've got this nice clean line of your optimal amount of scalability. What that really doesn't get into is the fact that that's not what games look like. Games look like this. When you launch your game, particularly if you're popular, and the best case is if you get major exposure on something like a Reddit or even better, Penny Arcade, you'll get a ton of users all at once. So if your servers are set up such that they've got a server online, and then when they reach 80% capacity, we scale up another server, and when you're 88% capacity across all those, you scale up one more server. What's actually going to happen is that by the time a server has spun up, been configured, and is actually accepting new users, you need about 20 more already. So in that situation, what you're going to have is your servers are just going to get completely overwhelmed. They're going to hit 100%, and they're just going to have a ton of traffic just waiting on the queue. And in the ideal situation, those servers will start to fail. They'll just start burning to the ground because they can't keep up. They're getting too hot. They weren't designed to run at this capacity level. You win. So what's going to stop you is going to be a really experienced producer. These guys are trouble. The reason here is because they've been through this before. They've seen what happens when an online game has to scale up to huge levels. And they're going to have a plan. They're going to understand what their initial user base is going to look like based upon the projections from their marketing team, their business team. They're going to follow what's going on in terms of social media trends, what sites are promoting them, what happens when people get promoted on those sites over time. And they're going to do a lot of planning around their marketing dates, when they're going to do content drops, what they're doing with the community, how they're engaging with them, and how that's going to affect their overall user levels. That sort of planning is going to make it really tough for your scale story to effectively take down your title, because if they've done all of those things, then they're going to have a good idea of what that picture is going to look like in terms of the scale of the title as it goes to launch and as you do all your content drops. So next thing you could try, so go with a single data center. You might still be able to get away with this one. It is a fairly simplistic concept, but some people might not really understand it yet. Go with an online data center, right? Tell them it's the cloud. How many people actually understand what the cloud is yet? Answer, people who've actually worked in it. Or, you know what, you could go with a single data center and you tell them, you know what, it's a great data center because a lot of companies use it. I love that one because it actually tells them that there's something bad happening. They just don't know it. There's already a lot of people using it. Odds are adding more capacity need to it is not necessarily a good thing. And frankly, yeah, a single point of failure, that's awesome. Any single point of failure, whether it's a process, a server, anything like that, those are going to be your best places for victory. So if you can't get away with that, try isolating to a single region. So you could go with just west coast of the United States, just east coast of the United States. That way you're in multiple data centers, right? Nobody can say you aren't scaling appropriately, you're not distributing it, appropriately. But what's going to happen is you'll have users globally who are taking a lot longer to get to your data center. The failure rates are going to be higher because there's going to be more packet timeouts, there's going to be more retries. And frankly, if a trunk goes down, that's fantastic. If you've got a major node that goes down in the internet, suddenly you've cut off, I don't know, maybe half the world from your game. So the problem here is what you're actually seeing on the upper left and lower right of that image. It's these things, availability zones. The information about this is becoming more and more well known. There's a couple of really good papers on Amazon site, for example, that talk about geo-availability and how you distribute your title across a number of different regions and how you make sure you're not going to have failover. This is a real problem if you're trying to destroy a title, because they're making this information well known. They're increasing the awareness of the actual fragility of the internet to the general public. That's bad for us. But you can still take great comfort in the fact that real resiliency is pretty expensive. So if people want to get to 3 nines, 4 nines, 5 nines, that's going to cost them geometrically more money, because you can have one data center at a certain cost. You can have 2 data centers at a certain cost. And as you keep growing that out, you're basically just multiplying out how much base money you've got to have on each one, regardless of how many users you have on your title. So I've got a few additional bonus ones in here that I threw in because I wanted to make sure we covered at least a good range of them, but I'm going to walk through them a little quickly, obviously. Matchmaking. Matchmaking is an interesting one because if your game is multiplayer, obviously, doing matchmaking, you're going to have a number of factors that you're using as the deciding factors for determining whether or not players are playing together. Okay, those data points, maybe they live in an SQL database. Hopefully, because if you've got them shunted all the way up to an SQL database living on a disk, well, great. Then you got the spin-up time necessary for the disk to come online, and you got the read time from the database. That's fantastic. Because what's going to happen in that scenario is as you get a very large number of players hammering away at match, they're not going to be able to keep up. The servers are not going to be able to keep up with the incoming requests, getting the data, and being able to make the matches necessary to get people into games together. Once again, you're in a failure scenario. Perfect. So another way to do it is if you keep the number of buckets available, and it goes right alongside the other, to a minimum, then your players have very few places they can go to play the game. Great. Once again, ideal. The things that are going to stop you is anybody who understands that if they keep their critical data in memory and they're using mirrored data sets and they're well segmenting their player base, well, they're going to get around this one. So I got one more for you. Client queries. These ones are fantastic. This one can get written off as a bug a lot of the times. And that's where you've got a retry coming from the client over and over again, just over and over. If you can get it every frame, oh, even better. You will just pound the server to guava. That's fantastic and a fun one to see happen in real life. The problem you'll run into here is an experienced developer who understands that he needs to do exponential backoff on his retries, and even worse, if he actually has a more sophisticated concept where he's putting the configuration file on the network, which informs the client of what the backoff rates should be based upon what's happening. He's giving more control to the team on the back end. Configuration files, they will make your life hard. Okay, so what's on your side in the end? Simple. Game and network complexity. The further you can get your testers away from real-world style testing, the more that they are not like how your players are actually going to be using the game, the better. More things will slip through. Also, quite often new features, and this one's really key, new features are often not tested until the last minute. I mean, let's face it, you've got to build the online service before you can actually start using it in test. So build, you get down to the last minutes, you're testing it, great, let's ship the thing out the door. Okay, perfect. The less time test is available, the better. And as I said, resiliency, getting to 3 nines actually isn't too hard. There's hours there you can be down per year. 4 nines, that gets a little more expensive. 5 nines, that gets really expensive. Just push that onto your producer. They won't want to spend the money. And remember, the internet hates everybody equally. It is your greatest ally in the fight. All right, and with that, I can turn off the evil, at least for a moment. Anybody have an idea which title, or I'm not going to name any titles, sorry, which of the things that I just spoke about has not been seen by me personally anyway? It really is only one of them. It's simple load testing, that's it. That's the only thing I have not seen a title do. Everybody did at least basic load testing. But apart from that, there's been at least one title I've encountered over the years that I've been doing this that's done every one of the things there. I mean, no matter how simple you might think some of these things are, the complexities really do add up. Particularly when you start talking about, a really large user bases distributed over really large areas, and with increasing complexity of the way the different operations within the game, interact. As a matter of fact, that's one thing I wasn't even able to cover. I'll just take one more sec. The way that your back-end components work together is really critical. Being able to make them isolated from one another and operate very independently is also very critical. The more interdependencies they have between each other, the more risk you're associating to your title. So, taking up probably my whole time, but let me just open it up and see if you guys have any questions about any of this, or honestly, anything else involving networking or online services. No? Oh, we got one.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
You talked a lot about stuff about a lot of pitfalls and things like that, but you didn't give us a lot of answers or solutions.
Well,
in particular, I want to talk about load testing, because that's one that
sure.
is very important.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you actually do a load test of the level that you're talking about specifically? Not doing the simple single silo, single point of failure, but trying to do something that considers geolocation, considering different user populations coming from different places, things like that. That's extremely difficult to do.
Absolutely correct. So that is probably the toughest one on here, and I will admit, it's the 20-minute format isn't something I'm not totally accustomed to, freely admit. So I was having to pare down a good bit. In order to do that kind of testing, and if you want to give me your card afterwards, by the way, anybody here, I'm happy to talk about this more. These days we have better tools available for that than ever before. Honestly, if you spin up servers in Amazon and you do some geodistribution across those, you put them in a number of different availability centers, and then what you can do is you can scale up to the actual number of clients you want to have. It's not, it's not the $2 a month you're probably used to spending on Amazon when you're doing simple testing. It will cost you probably in the hundreds, even thousands of dollars, but there's nothing like it. And it's really actually pretty straightforward to use Amazon in that way, or even Azure, I'm sure, to spin it up and have several thousand clients coming from each different geo. Now, what I would do and what I would highly recommend is it's very much like anything else with engineering, only change one factor at a time. So obviously do some basic load testing against the title. Once you've done the basic load testing against the title, then distribute it to a couple of locations, but keep every other factor exactly the same. Then try increasing load at just one site, then add another site. It's a sequential operation of adding complexity to it over time. But yeah, you're right that there's not a lot of good papers out there on that. That's actually one of the things that I have. I have a long list of white papers that I've actually got to get to. One of them is about a sequence of testing which gets you to that end result of having a really, really massive number of users hammering against your title, but in a fake manner so that you can test your title appropriately before launch.